The second invasion of the Soul Society is going slightly better this time, with the Soul Reapers doing a better job holding their own, something that even the leaders on both sides point out. With the return of their stolen Bankai and other measures that were taken to increase their power, the Soul Reapers have beaten back more of the Sternritter, but also taken losses of their own, and like most wars, the casualties continue to mount. For a second, I thought we were about to get the Shunsui versus Hoshvalt fight that I've been waiting for, but Hoshvalt is called away to deal with some of the defeated Sternritter. I've talked before about Hoshvalt being the letter B, and my guess for him was originally the Broken, but with all of this talk about balancing and scales, it seems likely that it actually stands for the balance, to the point where even his ability has something to do with tipping the scales. I don't know if it's a probability power or some kind of exchange ability, but it's enough to help him execute Songdu and BG9 after their defeats. I won't say I'll miss either of those Quincy that much, but it was pretty unfortunate for them that they were killed by their superior. The focus of these chapters, at least as far as antagonists, really centers around Mask Demasculine, and also sorta kinda absolutely centers on the little bell ringer with him, his biggest fan, James. Mask Demasculine stands out among the Vondenreich for very obvious reasons. A lot of them have their own unique looks, but very few so far are quite as unique as him. He's got an obvious pro wrestler luchador aesthetic, as if Armstrong from Full Metal Alchemist decided to get into the ring. Mask didn't do all that much in the first invasion in the grand scheme of things, but he was instantly memorable, and I was curious to see what his whole deal was gonna be, and in some ways, he was just what I expected, but in other ways, not what I expected at all. There's a whole aspect to this character that is kind of left up in the air just enough to speculate on, and it makes him so much more interesting. But before we dive into the mystery of this masked brawler, let's talk about who he was initially up against in this battle. We had some seated officers trying to take him on, and despite how much I love my Squad 11 duo of Ikaku and Yumachika, it doesn't go well for them. It also doesn't go well for my guy Hisagi. Hisagi has been having some real poor luck during the war. First, he had to get rescued by Yamamoto against the overkill Sternritter Driscoll back during the first invasion, and he doesn't fare much better here against a Mask either. I'm really hoping to see his Bankai, since I love his whole Grim Reaper aesthetic, but at this point, I'm not holding my breath, honestly. Thankfully, we make up for it a little bit when Kensei uses his foot to block Mask from stomping on Hisagi, in an iconic fashion that will soon after be echoed by another shonen series in quite the memorable moment. I can't even properly express how excited I was to see some of the other visored captains stepping into the action. Shinji fighting recently was a very welcome thing, but getting to see lesser established visored like Kensei and Rose take charge just made me so excited. Although Kensei being so harsh to Hisagi is sad after we know how much Hisagi respects him and like idolized him growing up. Never meet your heroes, kids. Like, yikes. I do wish we got to see Rose and Kensei mask up for this though. I know that they're back to being captains like they used to be, but I'd still love to see them show off the power they attained when they weren't, melding the new life they had for a century with the return to their old lives. Mainly though, these two have some of the coolest hollow masks, especially Rose, and I would love to see them put them on, even if it was just for the aesthetics. Back with the Soul Society or not, I'd like to see the visored be visored sometimes, you know? In general, I just want to see some hollow masks again because I'm me. Plus, they're up against a character who is so defined by his mask that it's in his name. We could have played to the importance of masks even more if Rose and Kensei put theirs on, to show who they fully are, who life has forged them into. It's right there, but that never comes into play. We don't have masks against masks, even though we totally could have, and it could have been very interesting. But yeah, it was great to see them in action again, even if it doesn't turn out great for them. Kensei doesn't do too well at all, even using his Bankai, which was rough to see, but at least it gave us a chance to finally see Rose in action. Thematically, there was a lot of potential to show two characters who are performers facing off stuff with Rose and Mask, but we don't really dive into that very much either. But I liked the idea when I was seeing them start to face off. Being a wrestler, Mask would of course thrive off cheers and shouts during a fight, while Rose is the type of artist that would want people so captivated that they hold their applause for the end. And his Bankai, we finally see, kind of relies on mesmerizing audiences into the grip of his music. Rose's Bankai was perfect for him, based on music and sound, properly hypnotic and ethereal rather than something bombastically loud, fitting for the artist that he is. I loved his explanation of the influence of music because that's how I view the power of music. How it can seep into your soul and influence you. How it can make you feel all kinds of things, believe all kinds of things. It's just this really cool power, and the way it was visually presented was really creepy, especially in the anime, but properly hypnotizing. But Mask puncturing his own eardrums to deafen himself was a crazy moment that made my skin crawl. I had a lot of ear problems growing up and had multiple surgeries as a kid for tubes and ear infections, so anytime there's like any sort of ear injury or stuff going in ears, I can't help but cringe extra hard. But it was a really smart way to neutralize Rose's threat, and it helped that his ears could be restored by James. It would have been extra scary and metal though if the damage was permanent and he was still willing to do that. But really, Rose should have been smarter about revealing how his powers work. Not telling Mask about the auditory reliance would have worked out much better, I think. Then he might not have ever even thought to get rid of his hearing. It was like that Black Bolt moment in Doctor Strange 2, when they shouldn't have said that he needed to speak for his powers to work. Speaking of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, you know how America Chavez can like rip open star-shaped holes in reality? Well, replace her with Mask Demasculine, and replace reality with Rose, and you've got Rose with a star-shaped hole in his chest. Did Rose just die? He got a star punched through his chest. I mean, he could have survived. I've seen people survive fatal-looking injuries before. Byakuya. I shouldn't have said I liked him. I shouldn't have been like, yeah, Rose, finally getting some time. Damn it. Damn it, Rose! Damn! But that's what you get for killing James! I was devastated to see this at first because we were just starting to see more of him. But sometimes, stories give you what you want just before ripping it away. I am totally fine with casualties in a story centered around a war, but I was still like, damn, I liked Rose a lot. Thankfully, before he can be finished off for good, Renji and Rukia return from their training, and Rukia takes the two Visor to get healed, so that was a close one. I figured Rose was dead after an injury like that, considering Izuru's death, but after Byakuya's survival, I'm not burying anyone too soon, and it looks like he'll be healed to continue his music career, thankfully, so that was nice. Don't get me wrong, the Visored are having their individual moments, but the group as a whole feels like they've really kind of faded a bit as far as relevancy. The underutilization of the Visored is probably why I haven't really spoken about what the others are doing on Earth so far this arc. Hiyori and the others noticed some rifts they're now apparently trying to seal, so that's keeping that part of the group in the human world, but sadly seems to be keeping them out of any of the action. Maybe it'll all lead to a grand reunion, or they'll play a big part down the road, but there's not that much road left in the grand scheme, so I think I just kind of missed their collective vibe that they had during the Ironccar arc as a group. A part of why these characters lost to Mask Demasculine is because of the seemingly harmless guy running around with him, who can heal him and reinvigorate him with cheers. This guy is James, a little super fan who's ringing bells and cheering for Mask and saying he's a superstar and hyping him up, and I immediately liked James because I thought he was hilarious. I loved him. Interesting, and we got James. I'm excited to see more of James because that's amazing. I love that he has a little guy that hypes him up. James has been stabbed! No! It's smart to do that, but no, James! He's going, Mister! When I first saw James, I figured he was nothing more than a funny gag character, just someone there to emphasize Mask being this big-time wrestler. But then it became apparent that James is actually extremely important, maybe even more important than Mask. I was like, oh wow, Mask gets his energy from the cheers of an audience, that makes sense. But it's even more than that. The first hints of what may be the truth to all of this. In order to beat Mask, you have to beat James, or Mask will just keep coming back and getting stronger when James cries and cheers him on and wants him to get up. I was like, oh, this is clever. A little commentary on the power of fans when it comes to performers, how their success depends on the fans and their audience. It's an interesting notion. So at that point, I'm like, it makes sense that Mask brought his groupie to this battle. That's such a fun concept. Maybe James is an extension of Mask's abilities and that he's like an embodiment of what Mask needs to survive. But honestly, I think it's even more than that, but we'll get there. Before Mask can finish the visor off though, Renji and Rukia return from the Soul King's palace when Renji sticks around to tag in. I loved this reintroduction as a quote-unquote villain because Mask sees himself as the hero of the fight. I don't know much about wrestling, but I know there are roles for them to like play with heels and all of that, so I liked this alluding to that a bit. Plus for me it was just a little reminder of how far Renji's come, when he seemed so villainous when we first met him, and nowadays like that couldn't be further from the truth. Renji's return from his training above gives a real change in power because we learn that he never actually knew the full name of his Bankai. He only thought he did, but his Zanpakuto spirit only gave him like half of its name, so it didn't fully acknowledge him as the wielder. This to me was absolutely hilarious because not only am I kind of thinking back on how many times Renji used his giant segmented snake and then got trashed, but also like if we're including the movies, he was letting people like ride on it sometimes. The whole time Zabimaru was just secretly kind of hating on him, like withholding crucial information. But since Zabimaru is part of Renji though, I guess he was kind of hating on himself or not letting himself reach his true potential because of insecurities. It's also kind of echoing Ichigo discovering more and more about himself and his own powers, is that Renji now has discovered more about his own abilities. But also I've never forgotten how much crap he gave Ichigo when they first met about not knowing his sword's name, and well, karma found ya eventually, Renji. It was also interesting hearing that the Squad Zero member, Ichibei, was the one that gave names to concepts in the Soul Society. Like, he created the names for Zanpakuto and Shikai, and that I assume was the contribution that gave him a spot in the squad, because they all contributed something that's important to the history of the Soul Society. And it's what allowed him to immediately see that Renji didn't know the Bankai name, like he thought he did. He was the perfect person to help him overcome that. I also had forgotten at first that this fight between Renji and Mask is sort of a rematch in a little way, since Mask was the one that launched Renji away during the first invasion, that kept him from interrupting Asnod and Byakuya, which then led to Byakuya almost dying. So it's something that once again might have had a lot more weight if Byakuya really died at that point. In that scenario, Mask would have been the guy that directly stopped Renji from saving his captain's life, making things very, very personal for Renji. But instead, there's none of that really, like at all. There's not a personal grudge, there's not a feeling of like this guy again, it's just like a small little thing. Oh well. I know I harp on that Byakuya thing a lot, but that surprising decision obviously still permeates a lot of things afterward. This is just another example of how his survival kind of might diminish some real drama, but it's not the end of the world, and Mask still got in the way then and still stopped Renji from helping his captain, so it still works. Moving on. I love what Renji's Bankai is actually like, with the snake blade and the primate arm coming out, and once he used it, he made real short work of Mask. I love when Renji gets times to really shine, and between this fight and his fight with Jackie last arc, Renji is being given some really badass moments. I imagine, given what we saw in these chapters between him and the Visored, Renji has gotta be strong enough to be a captain now, right? Like, he barely struggled at all against Mask, who just whooped like a half dozen Soul Reapers, including a couple captains. So I hope that by the end of the series, Renji's wearing a captain's robe. He really deserves one. I'd love to see it. Make him a captain. But yeah, Mask is killed and James is destroyed, and we learn that Yuabaha gains the power of his Quincy followers when they die, but Interestingly, Yuabaha doesn't say mask de masculine when the powers return to him. He says James. And the implication of that single moment kind of completely altered how I see this character, because the only reason Yuabaha would say James is if James is the actual Sternritter, right? I suppose the man beneath the mask could also be called James, but that would be one hell of a coincidence. No, I think it feels more intentional than that. That's when it really hit me, that it may be that James wasn't just a sidekick or a manifestation of Mask's Shrift power, so much as Mask could have been the manifestation of James's abilities. And I think that's much more likely, honestly, and a much more interesting angle on all of this. It would mean James isn't just this living applause battery, but is the one actually in control who conjured Mask as an extension of himself. That Mask is just a personification of his really strong power. And I think there are some good bits of evidence for this. We know they're connected, and that the only way to beat Mask is to beat James. As long as James is around, Mask will come back, but also as long as Mask is around, James will come back. There's a deep-rooted connection there, like two parts of a whole. So in that way, Mask also is James. I think it's important to Yuabaha saying that. The only one of them ever referred to as James was the little guy, and that Mask is never given a real name. We're not given anything about his real identity. He's more of a caricature than a person. Maybe James is really just this meek guy, but wishes he was more, so creates this idealized version of himself, or maybe he has a hero, like a real wrestler or something. His shrift takes the form of that person to fight in his place. Even the name of the shrift, S for superstar. Wouldn't it make sense that this power allows its user to create a superstar, someone that they could empower through their own enthusiasm, through their cheers and their praise, to manifest something that you idolize, something that is important and powerful, and that maybe is how you view yourself, how you want to be. So just for fun, I was looking into the significance of a wrestler's mask, and some of it honestly fits pretty well with what we're seeing here. Traditionally, the mask is used to create something larger than life, to solidify a persona, to hide the identity of the one beneath, to be something new, something powerful, to create something separate from their everyday self. It's a way to let go of inhibitions and inhabit someone new, someone that will play to a crowd, someone that will inspire, someone that'll be stronger than you could ever be. The mask allows someone to perform at a level that's different than what they might be able to do without it. It gives a sense of mystery, a sense of being larger than life. I could see that for James. Maybe he was just a Quincy and physically not very imposing, someone that dreamed of being more, and Yuabaha gave him the power to make that dream something of a reality, to get to see himself as something more, maybe something that he needed to really be finding his own confidence, cheering himself on, and hyping himself up to fight in ways that he never could before. I could be completely wrong about this, and it really is just Mask, and that James is either just a fan or is the personification and Mask is the real person, but it didn't feel that way reading it over a few times and watching the episode. It really feels like James is the key to all of it, someone who had the power to make himself more important and more beloved. But I'm not sure the story will ever fully confirm this, because now they're gone, they're defeated, both of them are dead and reabsorbed into Yuabaha. So it's a bit of a mystery, which is exactly what a wrestler in a mask would want. An air of anonymity that keeps his audience coming back for more, forever curious about the real man behind the mask. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. If you want to see more, I'm a little further ahead on the Patreon read-along and my anime reaction, so if you want to see where I'm at down the line, this was great, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next, so I'll see you all then. Take care.